What's going on, everybody? I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day to talk ball. It is week 5, and joining me to talk a little ball, it is the one, the only, the man himself. It is Justin Boone. Boone, what's going on, buddy?
Man, feeling good. We were having some laughs before the show. We were trying to get fired up before the show, and I think for good reason. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today.
We definitely have a ton to talk about. We got teams on bye. We have big-time matchups. You know, I always bring this up around this point of the season, and I'll definitely reiterate this when we talk to People's Panic Meter on Monday, which I know feels like 1,000 years from right now, but it is only a few days where we'll be talking People's Panic Meter post week 5. But right around this time of year, this is Adam Harstead, one of my buddies from Football Guys. He always talks about, like, once we get through the first 4 weeks of the season, first four or 5 weeks of the season, that is when current scoring, Boone, becomes much more predictive than ADP. Typically, things will smooth out. That's fine. But right about now is when we need to kind of start accepting these new realities. So I feel like that sort of theme will hang over this conversation and will certainly hang over our conversation on Monday.
Yeah, accepting new realities, like the fact that the Chargers receiving core is a lot different, and some people might have to chow down on a pen at the end of the season because of it, but that's a conversation for another day.
I'm holding it. Yeah, we'll update Pengate. I don't think we're talking Chargers here in this show, but we will be updating Pengate certainly on Monday. That's for sure. I will say, good matchup for Chargers receivers this week. The Commanders have given up a lot of explosive plays to the slot receiver, so I'm hoping that I will not be closer to pen meter by the time we get to the end of this week's game. But let's waste no more time. Let's get into it here. This is how this show works. In the first 2 segments of our weekly preview shows, Justin Boone gives us his 6-pack of questions for each week's slate of games. Segment number 3 is literally no one's games of the week. I pick 3 games that are not headlines by any means, but you need to care about these little lovable freak shows for fantasy football. Segment 4, that's the hurry up offense, where we rapid fire through the rest of the show. Predictions, questions, trying to make the other think a little bit with some of our answers. But with that, let's dive into Boone's 6-pack of questions for week 5. All right, Boone, hit me. What is the first question for this week?
Okay, so this one isn't necessarily about a specific game or any sort of preview kind of material. This one is more about fantasy and what can managers do to help their season. So what can managers who have losing records right now do to kind of salvage things, to turn things around? And we're digging like fairly deep on some of these. Like, these are some moves that I personally have done.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them may be a little shadier than others, Harmon, but we're going to talk about that as we go. But yeah, if you're, 4-0, 3-1 right now, you're feeling great. You're on top of the world. But let me remind you, things can change quickly. So you got to stay on top of everything. If you're 1-3, if you're 0-4, you feel like the bottom is just falling out. Your season's over. You're not going to make the fantasy playoffs. I'm here to tell you that's not the case. I have done it plenty of times where I've started off with a ton of injuries, or I started off with guys underperforming. And you know what? 0-4, 0-5 one time and still won the title. I feel really good about that one. Always bring that up. So it can turn around. It can definitely turn around, but you might have to be a little more proactive about it. So I got some suggestions here. I don't know if you have any you could throw out, but we'll talk about these as we go. Some things that people could be doing to try to get some immediate results and get things back on the right track and hopefully get back to 500 very quickly. So the first one here, trade for players who have good schedules over the next few weeks or over the next month or so. And that might seem obvious, but you're just trying to get every advantage that you can in your lineup, right? And it's very unfortunate right now that when I was looking ahead at some of the schedules, the Bears and the Packers have just incredible schedules, but they're on bye this week. So if you're 0-4 right now, you don't want to trade for the Bears or the Packers because they're not going to help you in this game. If you get the win this week, then you could think about those teams. Look at some other guys like Breece Hall right now. Brought him up as a buy low multiple times, but he gets the Cowboys, he gets the Panthers and the Bengals. Those are 3 of his next 4 games. Very good matchups for him. Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, I think they're interesting buy lows. We've mentioned them before. They get the Giants, the Patriots, and the Bears the next 3 weeks. And then if you can wait one more week, like I said, then I think you definitely want to invest in the Bears and the Packers, because they just have the best possible matchups from weeks like 6 to week 9 or 10, depending which one you're looking at there. But take a look around, see if there's any players out there who you like, who have some easier schedules coming up, and then look at your own roster and see the players that might have tougher games over the next couple of weeks that might make it difficult for you to get some wins, and swap those out. And I mentioned this, you might have to take a little bit of a haircut on that trade. And that's okay, because if you're 0-4, you got to get moving. You got to do something that's going to get you some wins. And that's the first thing that I think you can go out and look at your roster and do pretty quickly.
That's a really good piece of advice there, that, yeah, this trade might not look good on paper, might look like a little bit of a ripoff, like you tweeted out or whatever, and with the screenshot, and people are going to make fun of you. Who cares, man? You got to win, okay? Like, you got to get wins right now, because otherwise your season is going to be over very, very quickly. I did like the not piece of advice, but the note about the Bears and the Packers schedule, though, because, yeah, that is also something, too, that if you are a good team, and the team somehow that stinks in your league has Rome Odunze or whatever, and they need a win this week, if you can give them like a valuable piece that they can start now and potentially try to get Rome Odunze, and you might have to do the 2-for-1, totally think that makes a lot of sense, right? So I really think that that's something that you can do, because maybe you don't need him this week, or you could afford to drop a game. Not that you ever want to lose a game, but still, I think that makes a little bit of sense. I would also say, just from a dynasty angle right now, I know we're thinking about redraft and stuff like that, but from a dynasty trade angle, this is right about that time where you need to start figuring out like where your team stands. I don't want you to ever go into tank mode necessarily, but week 5, week 6, start getting realistic about what type of team you are. Are you a team that you think you're close, or you think you're kind of teetering towards the edge? I'll bring up a team of mine that I specifically have where I feel like I'd been kind of teetering on the edge of like, is this team, do I need to like push a few pieces in and make a run, or are we close to the end here? And I feel like I got a message from the universe this week, because the number one running back is Chuba Hubbard, which obviously isn't a great situation to begin with, but that's the number one running back on the team. Number 2 running back, I was all excited, like, all right, now we can play Trey Benson. Well, now we can't play Trey Benson, so I feel like I'm getting signs from the universe that I need to start being realistic with what type of team I have here.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And you also want to see, like in Dynasty especially, I always look ahead to see what my opponents look like the next couple of weeks, because I have a team, for example, where I'm doing all right, but I lost Joe Burrow. I do not have another quarterback to put into that spot. I have Dak Prescott, and then I don't have another super flex option there from a QB standpoint. So I looked ahead and I was like, hey, my matchups for the next couple of weeks are pretty easy. I can get by without having to go make a big trade and try to overspend to get a quarterback. Let's wait this out over a couple of weeks, see how it goes, and then make that decision. So you always have to approach this stuff on a case-by-case basis. And I think you make a very good point here, where a lot of the things we're saying for managers to do if they're struggling and trying to turn it around, the exact opposite applies to the teams with the winning records, right? So keep that in mind as we're going through these, because I think they can kind of help everybody out there. Now, this next one, it should be obvious. If you need wins now, you can't have players sit on your bench who are injured. You just mentioned Trey Benson. That's a perfect example of a guy where if you have Trey Benson, can you wait that 4 weeks while he's on IR before he comes back? Probably not if you have a losing record. So trade him. Everyone's saying he's going to come back later in the season. This isn't a James Conner situation where he's going to be out for the year. So you trade him away. Again, you might have to take a loss on that trade because he's injured and not going to play for at least a month. But you make that trade to get him off your roster and get a piece that can help you right now. And you might have to package him with something else. Like, all of that has to be taken into account here. And when we say like you're selling at a bit of a discount, we're not talking about selling an RB1 or a wide receiver 1 for like an RB3, a wide receiver 3. You're taking a discount. Maybe you have to go down to like a wide receiver 2, RB2 situation. You're not taking a massive, massive discount on these. So also keep that in mind. I put out my rest of season rankings, my trade value charts every single week. You can go check those out. They're a guide. Every league is different, but you can use those to make some, offers, kind of put it together, see if you can get in the right ballpark on some of these deals. I'm factoring in all these injuries. So keep that in mind. Go take a look at those as well. And I think that's a very important one when you get these injured players that you were waiting on, when you get guys who potentially are suspended. And Rashee Rice is a big one right now, where if you're holding him and you have a losing record, you got to make a decision very quickly. Can you wait until week 7 before he comes back? Probably not. So if you have a losing record right now, you got to move him in order to get wins. And on the flip side, if you're a team in a comfortable position, you absolutely, like, the number one priority right now should be going out and trying to get Rashee Rice on your roster, because I think when he comes back, he's going to be a top 15 fantasy receiver. And potentially, depending on the manager who has him right now, you could get him at quite the discount, and he could come along and just be a huge piece for you in the second half of the season.
Yeah, it's always easier to say wait those 6 games in the offseason than it is once we actually get to the real games. So it will be interesting to see, for the people out there, who is the manager in your league that has Rashee Rice? Because if they're 2-3 by the end of the weekend, they probably still think they've got a shot. But if they're one of these 1-4 or, God forbid, 0-5 teams, because they took them with a priority pick and they're just sitting on something and they have been able to cobble something together, they might be a little bit more willing to give you something that will help you right away. So we threw up a poll from our YouTube chat, by the way. If you're watching along with us right now, we appreciate you. We would also appreciate if you would subscribe to the channel as well, if you don't for whatever reason. We asked the folks in the chat, are you feeling good about your fantasy teams right now? 41% say yes, it's going great. Only 26% say no, everyone hurts. Everyone is hurt. 20% is nothing matters, and then 13% is no, I just stink at this. Boone, I'm going to say shout out to us and shout out to our listeners and viewers. 41% say it's going great. That's some good data right there.
Yeah, I thought, based on all the injuries, I thought that one was definitely going to take it here. But no, that's good to see that's the one. So we're helping still a big amount of people here, but not the majority apparently, which is a good thing, like you said. The next one is the one that I mentioned that gets a little bit shady depending how far you want to take it here, Harmon. So you tell me, is this too far? Is this too much doing this? But I will say I have done this before. So the easy part of this is trade away guys that have upcoming buys, because you can't have those zeros in your lineup. You can't wait it out. So you trade away guys with upcoming buys. You trade them for guys that have buys later in the season. That's simple. That's obvious. And then if you want to take it one step further, you could wait until later in the season and then trade those guys before their buys come for guys who have already had their buys. So essentially, you're just working through it. You're avoiding these players having any buys. You're not taking zeros for those weeks. You're trading them before their bye week right now for a later bye. And then before their bye comes in week 11, week 12, whenever, you trade them for someone that had a bye in week 5 or week 6, right? Very simple, very straightforward. Now, the step further and the place where it gets a little shady, have you ever looked ahead at your opponents that you potentially might be trading with, looked at the week that you were playing against them, Harmon, and said, hey, I have this guy on bye in week 10, and I'm playing that manager in week 10. What if I trade him to that manager? Now, that manager often will not look at bye weeks. They're just going to be excited to get that player in a trade. But if you need those wins, when that matchup comes up, you have now put them at a disadvantage. They're going to be shorthanded without that player that week. It's next level. It takes a lot of effort. That's why I only recommend doing this if you are a losing team at the moment, because you got to kind of go a little further with that one. It doesn't always work out either. You might not find the right trade partner and the right bye week and all that sort of stuff. But that is a next level extra step move that you could do to give yourself that much more of an edge to try to get another win.
What I'm learning from this is that the answer is probably both, but either you are just way more diabolical than I am, or you're just a way better fantasy football player than I am, which the answer is probably both to that. You did beat me last week, so per the stats, you're better than me. But we'll leave that there. I think that's just like a level I've never even thought of, dude. I've never even thought of doing something like that. So, and I do say this all the time. I will admit this to the people that listen to the show, that watch the show. I am just not good at fantasy trades. I don't think I'm a very good analyst when it comes to fantasy trades, and I don't think I'm all that great about it on my own, mostly because of what you just said there. Like, the thing, and this is so stupid. I admit this is stupid. I'm like, dude, Boone, where is your loyalty? The guys that you drafted, you just have no loyalty to these players. You're treating them like, oh, come in the door, come out the door. When I need you, you're here. When I don't, you're gone. I mean, where is your loyalty, man? That was my thought there, which again, I recognize is stupid because this is all make believe.
I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that people make in fantasy. They'll draft a team. They become married to those players. They think they were totally right. After they draft a team, they spend a week or two looking at that roster and just falling in love with all those guys. And then whenever anybody doesn't, perform like they expected, or if there's an injury that's slowing a guy down, they just want to hang in there. They want to hold out. No, you can't do that, especially when you have a losing record. You got to make a quick decision. In fantasy, when it comes to fantasy players, I'm not looking at loyalty. I'm a loyal person in real life. When it comes to fantasy, I carry no loyalty to these players. Maybe some of the Bills guys. Maybe I would hold on to them a little longer than I should. But other than that, I carry no loyalty. I am making moves to try to win. I want to get those bragging rights over my coworkers, over my friends, over whoever I am playing against in fantasy. That's just the competitive nature in me, Harmon. It drives me from inside and it makes me want to win. And I'm doing everything I can to try to make that happen.
Oh, I mean, hey, everybody's different, man. I'm a loyal guy, and you've got a wandering eye. I get it. No, that's fine. No, that is real. That is really smart. It is smart to have that approach to it. And like I said, this is something I struggle with. I'm trying to get better about it, and just being more open to trades, being less attached to certain things, whether that's my opinions, my the players that I draft, things of that nature. So I do think that is really good advice, and all that can be helpful for teams that are kind of trying to make that transition here right around week 5 to prepare for the rest of their season. Let's get to your second question here for the week.
All right. What should we expect from the Dolphins and the Giants offenses now that they just lost their star receivers? What is going to happen? We didn't think these were great offenses to begin with necessarily. They had some red flags. They had some issues. And now we don't have arguably the best player in those offenses moving forward. I don't really know how to assess this Dolphins team at the moment. I know that Devon Achane is going to be fantastic because he has just been awesome no matter what's happened, basically. Other than Tua getting hurt, nothing has really slowed this guy down. Right now, he's on pace for 80 catches. I would say with Tyreek going out, that number's probably going to go up, right? Like, he is going to be so involved in this passing game. And despite all their struggles, he's on pace for over 1,600 scrimmage yards. He's on pace for almost 13 touchdowns. So he is somehow going to get a bump from this, I think, even though maybe the whole offense is going to become a little less efficient, maybe some less scoring opportunities with Tyreek not out there. He is going to get so much work that I don't think it's going to matter. He is the one matchup proof piece in this offense. Jalen Waddle's the obvious benefactor, right? On paper, he is the one that finally steps into this number one role. We thought that it could happen this season based on Tyreek maybe getting traded at some point. Didn't necessarily think it was going to be an injury, but that's the way it goes. Everybody wants to point to that one game where Tyreek missed and Waddle just went off, 8 catches, 142 yards, and a touchdown. And I think, in general, this is a great thing for Waddle's fantasy value because it pushes him up into that wide receiver 2 range, where before this, he was more of like a volatile kind of boomer bust wide receiver 3. But this week, Harmon, I want to know what you think about this one. Does he get a little more J.C. Horn? Is this going to potentially be a problem for Waddle in some of these matchups where now he has to encounter the top potential, or at least all of the attention from the defense, where Tyreek was taking a lot of that away before? Is that going to be an issue for him? Because, you could put up points on Carolina, but they've actually been pretty good against fantasy wideouts, right? Stephon Diggs last week, he had a really good game. He's the only receiver who's gone over 60 yards against them this year. He's the only receiver who's put up double-digit fantasy points on them this year. So it seems like it's a good matchup. And yet, is it actually a good matchup for Waddle this week?
It's a great point because I think J.C. Horn has played some really good football this year.
Absolutely.
And by the way, if you did not have this on your 6-pack of questions, Dolphins Panthers was absolutely going to be one of my no one's games of the week because of the situation that we're talking about here with these Miami Dolphins receivers. I'm going to be laser focused, if not during that game live at 1 p.m. Eastern. I can't promise that that's going to make one of the boxes here, one of the screens. But we got teams on bye, so maybe I'm not ruling it out. We'll see what the alignment looks like, but I'm going to be dialed into where these receivers line up, Monday morning. I'm going to be putting this game on and trying to find out, what are our clues here? Because part of my optimism for Waddle this year was what you mentioned, that if Tyreek Hill moved on, or they just started to de-emphasize him a little bit because Waddle is still the 12th highest paid wide receiver by APY. They have an investment in this guy. They don't act like it, but they have an investment in this guy. And because Tua gets the ball out so fast and Waddle is consistently the outside on the line of scrimmage player, he's just never going to come up in the progressions before Tyreek is the number one move around guy, or then just Devon Achane on those little swing passes out of the backfield. So that's why his target numbers always feel so inconsistent. He seems like he goes long stretches without getting the football. That is the reason why to me. Now that has to change. You would imagine, and if you go back in that one game that you mentioned, the Jets game from 2023, late that season, 8 catches, over 140 yards, I believe. And a lot of those were just the quick hitting designed things where they're moving him around, Jalen Waddle, just like they moved Tyreek Hill around. And if you think of the difference between the 3 receivers that we were just talking about that have played Carolina recently, Stephon Diggs played like 50-40 outside inside, some obviously move around there to get to 100%, but he was basically like splitting time between outside inside. Marvin Harrison Jr., week 2, he goes quiet against Carolina. He is like almost exclusively an outside X receiver. Drake London in week 3. What did we come out of that week 3 game complaining about? Where's the Drake London slot stuff? Like, why is he just lining up so much outside and running these kind of static routes, not over the middle of the field? So if Waddle, and I don't know the answer to this because it's impossible to know without seeing it, if Waddle is moved around more, which I think he should be and could be, then he will avoid some of that tough matchup with JC Horn. So I'm optimistic about it. Nick Westbrook-Akine got the kind of promotion to the number 2 receiver role from a routes perspective in the second half. And he just makes so much sense as like a sacrificial X receiver to allow, because he's a big body. He ran vertical routes at the Titans, move Waddle around the formation there, and that allows Malik Washington to kind of stay. And I love Malik Washington. Just he stays in that kind of his specific role. He's not going to get a change in routes and deployment because he's already deployed really well in the offense. But I think more targets can go his way, and he is a nice sleeper option as well.
Yeah, like fantasy-wise, though, I question whether Malik Washington or Westbrook-Akine, whether either of those guys are going to become fantasy starters. And I really like Malik Washington as well, and I've talked about him as like a guy to stash. And again, it was because we thought Tyreek might get traded. And yet, the more I look at this, I'm not sure that he's going to get the kind of volume to be a consistent fantasy option for you. Maybe somebody can help you in bye weeks if you got injuries, but I don't know. And part of it is because, and I can't believe I'm saying this, because we just saw Darren Waller come back and take on a pretty interesting role in this offense. And I'm not going to overreact to a guy catching, 2 touchdowns on, fairly limited usage in his first game back, but now they really need him. And he showed that he had enough. He's talking to them that he is more than ready to take on more work in this offense. I think he is an intriguing streamer right now at tight end. I think he's a guy that, let's face it, like he's shown us that he could be a top 12 tight end before. And now we look for these guys. Again, Harmon, what do we say before the season? We're trying to find these like sleepers at tight end. You're looking for a guy who could be the de facto number 2 receiver in his offense. Well, doesn't Waller kind of look like he could be that now in Miami? Like, I think this is a really interesting one to potentially invest in. A lot of people did this week. I had him in the waiver wire column. We talked about him on the waiver wire show. Actually, no, that was before the game, right? So we didn't talk about him
it was before,
on Monday, but I've written about him, ranked him all week. People should have gone out and picked him up. I added him to the waiver wire column. And definitely somebody that I think could come on and potentially crack that top 12. That low end tight end 1 range is not hard to get into, let's face it. And if you're going to score touchdowns like we know Waller can, he could get in there fairly easily, I think.
I agree. And he's going to be used in very different ways than they used Jonnu Smith last year because they're really different players. Jonnu Smith is like a move around H-back type tight end, whereas Darren Waller is literally a former converted wide receiver. So he's got that big body. And you even saw at times in that it was almost exclusively close to the goal line, but he was lined up as a true outside receiver. So I think we're going to see some of that for him as well, which again, by the way, if we get those in the short areas, that's going to just allow Jalen Waddle to move into the slot. And I think get more of those favorable matchups. So I really do think this is a big moment for Jalen Waddle, rest of season for him. Like what is he? Is he somebody that the team, if it's this group of decision makers or it's the next group of decision makers, can be a player like that's a foundational guy for this offense? I think this is a big moment for him, and I'm enthusiastic about him from a fantasy perspective. Let's quickly hit on the Giants here, because when you said like arguably the best player on the offense, I think it's actually pretty inarguable that Malik Nabers is the best
on
player
that side, yeah.
on the Giants. On that side, Andrew Thomas is a great left tackle, but he's been in and out of the lineup. And again, from a fantasy player perspective, it's definitely Malik Nabers and then a steep drop to anybody else. And man, Boone, I think like what is going to happen in this Giants offense is they're just going to run as much as they can. They're going to run Dart. They're going to run Scatabo. Those guys are going to take a ton of punishment here over the next few weeks, because I don't see like an answer in the passing game, whether it's these wide receivers or anything like that.
Yeah, and this one's so unfortunate. Like, I feel like I got this one right last week where we talked about, like, is the Giants offense about to get fun? And all of a sudden it was like, yeah, it can get fun. Yeah. And that irrational confidence that Dart and Scatterbo bring, it was working. It was totally changing things there and giving them this ability to compete with a much better team in the Chargers. I know the Chargers suffered some injuries in that game, but still they were able to go toe-to-toe with the Chargers and win. But the Nabers injury, it just ruins everything, right?
Ruins everything, yeah.
It just ruins everything. It ruins the ceiling for basically all of these guys. Like Dart coming out, showing the rushing ability, so many designed runs as well, which is great for his fantasy value. He could still be a pretty solid quarterback too for fantasy. A guy will have some QB1 weeks probably when he finds the end zone as a runner. But overall, it's going to be very difficult for him to end up as a top 12 fantasy quarterback this season without Malik Nabers out there. And then Cam Scatterbo, like the volume that he is getting is just incredible, right? Like they've just turned him in to one of the biggest volume getters, running backs in the league. And he's doing pretty well with it. He's had some tough matchups and he's continued to produce through it. And now I think it's going to be like a 1 week kind of blip on the radar, because you have the Nabers thing happen. So unfortunate. And then they get this one game versus the Saints where everything actually is probably going to look okay, right? Like New Orleans, they're giving up the 4th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. They're giving up the 9th most to running backs. They're going to probably do well in this game, I think. But after that, it gets so much more difficult, right? Immediately after the Saints game, Eagles, Broncos, Eagles again. Like that's reality is going to set in over those 3 weeks. Defenses are going to realize that they don't have to worry about a guy like Nabers anymore. They can just come up, crowd the box, and try to stop these guys in the run. And I think that's going to be a big time problem for them. But this week you could definitely use these guys. Dart potentially as a streamer. Scatterbo, I think, has possibly top 12 potential this week. Like this guy could actually have a huge game in this matchup. And then you just look at Wan'Dale Robinson and Darius Slayton as like wide receiver 3 flex options. Hopefully you don't have to rely on them, but they could definitely get into your lineup with some bye week issues and with some injuries out there this week.
Yeah, Slayton can do more of the – it's kind of like they're going to try to replace Malik Nabers in the aggregate, where Slayton does some of the downfield stuff and Wan'Dale does the design touches. I mean, he had a negative air yards per target in the second half, did Wan'Dale Robinson, after Malik Nabers went down. So he's back. The short, empty calories reception king is back in Wan'Dale Robinson. And then we'll see if Jalen Hyatt can give him anything, because he hasn't so far to this point in his career.
I'll mention too, Theo Johnson at tight end. Not someone that I would necessarily play this week unless you're desperate, but a guy that you could stash to see if he's someone that gets a little more volume with Nabers not out there now.
I like that they designed that play for him this past week. So that was encouraging to see. And he is definitely a guy that is intriguing to me, was intriguing to me as a deep, deep sleeper in the summer. And yeah, he is probably, if you made me pick like a Giants pass catcher that I was most optimistic to, or most interested to see, I wouldn't say optimistic, but most interested to see by the end of the season who they develop into. Because I think we know who Darius Slayton is. I think we know who Wan'Dale Robinson is. But Theo Johnson potentially has some untapped upside, and we're always searching for that next athletic tight end breakout type, and he certainly fits that. And Nate and I read off the top 12 tight end list at the end of last episode. It's a group you can crack, okay? There's still a lot of weird names there that are top 12, so there's certainly a chance for a guy like Theo Johnson. But all right, let's get to your third question here, because this is one of the biggest topics of the week.
Well, I think normally we would have started with this one, but I think you touched on it on yesterday's show. You've already hit on it this week, so it's still worth bringing up just to kind of figure out how people should be valuing these guys. But how are we ranking these backup running backs that are potentially going to end up as starters in week 5? They got some injuries on the roster ahead of them. So I'm talking about Rico Dowdle. Chuba Hubbard had the calf injury last week, played through it. Now they're saying that he came into this week a little bit worse, and he has not practiced through 2 days. So what does that mean for him? He could potentially get out there Friday. Like we saw this happen last week where he missed practice Wednesday. He was limited Thursday and Friday, and then he ended up playing in the game. So this will all come down to Friday, but it certainly seems like it's trending towards him not being available this week. Obviously, we know the situation with the Bucs, where Bucky Irving ends up in a boot here. It's a foot sprain. Doesn't seem like it's going to be a long-term situation, but I don't think he's going to play this week. I think he might miss a couple games at least, and we'll see Rachaad White and Sean Tucker take over there. And then the Cardinals may be the most interesting one of all, just because I don't think we're 100% sure how this would work out. I feel pretty confident that it's going to be Michael Carter stepping in while Trey Benson is out. Definitely in a game like this where they are big time favorites, where there should be some positive game script, where the Titans are giving up a ton of fantasy points to running backs. I think Michael Carter will take over there, and then Amari Demercado will be the passing down back. But I'm ranking them basically the way I just said. I would play them if Hubbard misses. Rico Dowdle is definitely the guy to target. Rachaad White would be the next one. I think if it was a long-term injury, if we were going to talk about Bucky Irving being out for the entire season, then we could talk about Sean Tucker potentially getting in there and overtaking White and being the guy. I think in a short stretch, I think they're just going to trust the veteran guy. They know him. They feel like he can take over that job, and he's playing pretty well in his opportunities. So I think White would be second there. Those two guys would be RB2s. Dowdle, kind of a mid-range RB2. White, more of a low-end RB2 for fantasy. And then Michael Carter is still just an RB3 flex option. You probably don't feel great putting him in your lineup, but with this matchup, I would be okay doing it if you have to. And then Amari Demercado, just a deep kind of risky flex.
I like a lot of what you said there. I would disagree slightly in that I think that Rachaad White is actually the top-ranked guy, even if it's Rico Dowdle starting for the Panthers.
Interesting.
Just because you mentioned this, Rachaad White has been pretty good this year. He's fourth in success rate among running backs that have had 20-plus carries. He's just getting the yards that are there. 43.5% of his runs have gone for 5-plus yards. That's sixth most among running backs with 20-plus carries. So he's been steadily just gaining yards. He's not been as inefficient as he was previously, which maybe if he goes back to a high-volume role, he does become kind of inefficient as a rusher. But even if that's the case, he's got the pass catching ability. And in this game against Seattle, I think that a Bucs offense that has struggled to establish the type of run game that they had last year, where meanwhile Jacksonville, with the former Bucs offensive coordinator, is high flying as a rushing attack. I think that's not a coincidence. They've struggled to gain that rushing momentum that they had last year. This matchup against the Seahawks, I imagine the Bucs are going to be throwing the ball a lot. So even in a scenario where Sean Tucker is the lead back, which I don't buy, but even if he was, I think he was still going to lose a lot of work to Rachaad White anyways, because they're going to probably be in trailing situations, and it's going to be White on the field there. So I think he can be the best fantasy back. I will say about the Rico Dowdle thing, because he would be second for me if there's no Chuba Hubbard, ahead of the Michael Carter, Amari Demercado, whatever that ends up being. But Rico Dowdle, I think, is a good back. I really liked when the Panthers signed him. And I just put this article up on the site today about the top 12 rushing teams in the NFL by success rate on their running back runs. The Panthers are 10th on that list, which surprised me because,
for sure,
I mean, and I think it surprises me because the Panthers have just been in such a weird, they've been in weird game scripts all season. To put a point on that, by the way, Boone, this blew my mind. The Panthers rank second highest in time of possession per drive this season behind the Colts. 3 minutes and 19 seconds on average. Second most time of possession per drive. Meanwhile, they rank 27th in percentage of drives that end in a score. So they're just on the field and not doing a ton with it. And that's kind of what the Panthers are right now. That's a good matchup, and I guess it is a good rushing ecosystem. So if they can manage to be competitive in this game with the Dolphins, which is possible, then Dowdle should get a lot of work. But because I don't have the confidence in that, and I feel a little more confident in the game script for White, that's kind of why I trended toward the Bucs back if I got to pick between the two.
Yeah, the volume in the matchup is really what puts Dowdle above him for me. And the matchup, you said it, right? It's a good matchup against the Dolphins. They're allowing the third most rushing yards and the seventh most fantasy points to running backs this season. Though I will say, if the Bucs decide to attack by throwing to Rachaad White a bunch, that is the way to do it for a running back against that Seahawks defense. We saw CMC with 73 receiving yards. We saw Jaylen Warren 86 receiving yards against them. So I think he would need to have that big day through the air. And then even like all of these guys have like paths to potentially producing because the Cardinals backs too, like I said earlier, that's a really good matchup as well. Like with being such huge favorites, 7.5-point favorites in that game, you would imagine that the Cardinals can come through here and actually give them a positive game script to run the ball, to produce. And I don't think it would be Amari DeMercado at that point. If we get that kind of game script, we could always be surprised by that. But I thought Ben Gretsch did a really good job pointing out that last week, as much as Amari DeMercado had the stats late in the game because they were trailing and he was getting thrown to and stuff, it was actually Michael Carter in the first half who was the one that got into the game and kind of looked like the number 2 back there. And it's just another one of these situations like Washington has the same thing, right? Where like they bring a guy up who hasn't really played and he doesn't really play because he's not doing special teams. And then he gets into the lineup and vaults over some guys and ends up being the starter. And we saw Michael Carter maybe make a little bit of a mistake and let it slip that, going from one week being the top practice squad guy to the next week being the starter. That kind of tipped us off as well that he's potentially going to be the guy here. So you don't feel great necessarily about starting him, but I definitely think he could have a good game and maybe even push the other two to get up into that low end RB2 range.
All right, Boone, we are back. It is time to talk your fourth question here heading into week 5. Let it rip, man.
This is a guy we talked about on Monday, but I think it's worth revisiting exactly how we feel about him this week. And that's Woody Marks. Does he continue to ascend in week 5, right? Like, I don't think this is a surprise to people because he was one of the most added players on the waiver wire this week. But does he continue to get more work? Does he continue to be the guy? We know when it comes to rookie backs, like it isn't always just that cleared direct line to the top, right? There can be some twists and turns along the way. They can make mistakes when you have a veteran back like Nick Chubb there, who's probably going to do most things that coaches like, even though he doesn't necessarily have the skill or the athleticism to do what he used to do on the field. He'll be able to step in if we see Woody Marks making some mistakes. But that game last week, like, Marks looked fantastic, and going back and watching it more, man, like the 69 rushing yards, the touchdown, 17 carries, I think that's the big part because we knew that he had the receiving chops, right? 50 receiving yards and a score on 4 receptions. That's great. We knew he had that. We needed him to prove that he could be that sustaining running back, that he could be that guy that could take over that aspect. Last week, he certainly did, right? Played a season high 56% of the snaps. I mentioned on Monday the 21 touches. That's the most that any Texans back has had this year. And the Ravens defense is an interesting matchup because I think before the season, we would have said, man, this is a terrible team to go up against, and we would have loved to see him go against someone else. And yet right now, with how banged up the Ravens are, like they're uncharacteristically giving up the most fantasy points to running backs this season. And yeah, a lot of it came in that Lions game. Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, they each had 2 touchdowns, just totally crushed them in that game. But even like Isaiah Pacheco ended up with an okay fantasy line. I know it was kind of a, receiving touchdown that got him there, but James Cook, Quinshon Judkins, like a bunch of running backs have had decent fantasy days against this defense. And now with Lamar out, with these injuries on the defensive side of the ball, like the Texans are actually favored in this game by 2.5 points. Like who would have thought that after week 1, right? Nobody. It's been really, really a bad run out for the Ravens over the last few weeks here because of all these injuries and now probably not having Lamar. And yeah, I think Marks kind of almost looks like if he continues in this role, kind of almost looks a little matchup proof because he has those receiving chops. I think he's going to be able, it's almost like the Cam Scatterbo thing where if you're going to get that volume, you're going to be okay to put in fantasy lineups no matter what the game script ends up being. But here, it kind of looks like it could be a positive one for them. And that makes him a pretty solid RB2 for fantasy in my mind.
Yeah. Before the Woody Marks thing, I would have said this is a pretty classic stoppable force, movable object type game, right? Because the Texans run game has been so bad, but the Ravens run defense has been, you've been able to get them this year. That is certainly for sure. They rank 29th in EPA per rush allowed. They rank their bottom 5 in success rate as well. They've just been a team that you can run on this year because of all those injuries. Nnamdi Madubuike being out for the rest of the season, that's going to continue to happen. He's a difference maker on the inside. But then what Marks did, it was just like a breath of fresh air. I didn't come away from that thinking, oh man, this guy's the next great running back in the NFL. But specifically on gap runs where you saw him just get a crease and he could hit it. That's just something they have not had. Even with Joe Mixon, he was just kind of a steady grinder in the zone scheme that they had last year. That's kind of what Nick Chubb has been so far for them. Nick Chubb at this point in his career, Joe Mixon at that point in his career, they're not going to give you the explosive ability. I love DeMeco Ryans, but he's the head coach of the team. So to me, it's like the buck stops with you. Maybe it's a Nick Caley thing, keeping Woody Marks and these rookie receivers on the bench. I don't know. The offense feels very Patriotsy, and that is historically a tough offense to pick up and tough for the young players. But I definitely came away from that game being like, all right, why do we wait so long? Why do we wait so long to see Woody Marks? You traded up to get this guy. You traded a pick away from next year. What are we doing here? Because he immediately just gave their run game some life. And as a receiver, gave C.J. Stroud an option to get the ball out when he is feeling duress, which I think they need. They need more pressure answers on this team.
Well, and it seems crazy that we're kind of targeting the Ravens almost now for fantasy, right? But that's where it's gotten to with these injuries, because they're top 5 in terms of most fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers, and tight ends are 11th. So it's not even that far off. Like, you could play everybody against the Ravens. You almost want to play everybody against the Ravens this year. And it feels really strange, but that's where we're at. I would also say, I don't know what you feel like with Nick Chubb now, but I almost feel like he's just droppable. Like, unless you're holding him as like a one injury away guy, like we saw what he is in this offense, it is not going to be great for fantasy. So if you're holding on because of the name value, which I know a lot of people still do, I think you could drop him and try to find somebody with a little more upside on the waiver wire, go out and get a Kendre Miller or somebody like that could maybe earn a bigger role and kind of has some more juice. Because Nick Chubb, he's not dialing it back at any time soon.
No, I think it's over for Nick Chubb, unfortunately, which stinks because he's a player that was really enjoyable. Obviously, he was one of the best running backs in the league when he was at his peak. But yeah, even if Marks was to go down, we know what Nick Chubb looks like, and I think we know what that is for fantasy. It's probably not going to help you. But yeah, I'm interested to see what this Texans offense looks like in what suddenly does look like a gettable spot. I mean, even the Ravens are so banged up in the secondary. Roquan Smith wasn't playing good football, but he obviously is going to miss some time here. Kyle Hamilton picked up an injury this week. They're just decimated on both sides of the ball too. That's another thing for Woody Marks' favor. Cooper Rush is going to be starting this game against a defense that has Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson coming after him. So, like, I think we're going to see a lot of run first game scripts. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, like they're going to have to try to rely on Henry, but it just doesn't seem like Henry's necessarily been that guy this year. And maybe he's at a stage of his career where, like, without that threat of Lamar to potentially run the ball, like, what is Henry necessarily going to look like? Because he hasn't been great the last couple of weeks. We'll see if they have Ronnie Stanley this week, who's one of their best run blockers. Like, he's been injured. Will he be able to play in the game? I think he missed practice on Wednesday. I think he was back out there in a limited fashion. He's got an ankle injury, so we'll have to watch to see if he's going to play. That could be yet another loss for this offense, right? And yeah, if they can't get it going, if they fall behind, we've talked about it before, that just totally game scripts Derrick Henry right out of it. Like, he's not going to be involved enough in the passing game to come through for fantasy. So you need them to keep this close. You need him to kind of break a couple of those big runs. And without Lamar out there kind of drawing some attention away from the defense, I really question whether he's going to be able to do it. Now, Cooper Rush, I'll give him some credit. Like, I think he's a pretty good backup. Like, we saw him last year, right? He stepped in for Dak, like an injury spot there. He went 4-4. He had 3 fantasy finishes inside the top 15 fantasy quarterbacks. He had 5 inside the top 20. So fantasy wise, you're not going to start him in like a single quarterback league, but 2 QB league super flex, you could potentially look to him. He'll keep the trains on time, but that's not what this offense needs. They need Lamar out there kind of elevating everybody. And now they're not going to get that from the quarterback position. You got to bump everybody down. Like, Zay Flowers was somebody who was like flirting with, top 12 fantasy wide receiver numbers a couple of weeks ago. Now you're moving him down to like low end wide receiver 2, maybe even wide receiver 3 range this week. You're not really playing any of the other receivers in this offense. And even Mark Andrews, who had the big game a couple of weeks ago, we see Isaiah Likely come back. We see Isaiah Likely kind of eat into his snaps. And now you question again, is Mark Andrews more of just a streamer type, not necessarily somebody that you're going to feel great about putting out there as a top 12 fantasy tight end? So it's bad times, and it is a bad spot for this Ravens offense right now.
Yeah, I just want to note on their run game too, because when I was looking this up today, and I saw this was kind of a talking point on social media as well on Twitter, that they're last in the NFL in running back carries on first and second down, which is crazy to think. The Baltimore Ravens, their yards per carry is high, but when you parse that number out a little bit, so on, again, early down runs, first and second down, they're third in percentage of carries to go for 10 plus yards. 15.1% of their yards or their carries have gone for 15 plus yards. But then they have the they have a really high stuff rate as well, which is runs that go for 0 or negative yards. They have the 10th highest stuff rate. So they're just getting a lot or they're getting nothing in the run game right now. So it's just that's the Derrick Henry thing, and I feel like it is, to your point, it's going to be harder to get those big plays if you don't have Lamar Jackson there creating those runs. So the yards per carry looks good, but this is what happens when you average out 10-plus yard runs and 0-yard runs. You get somewhere between 5.5 and 6. So it's a tough spot for Derrick Henry. I continue to feel as if the vibes on just where Derrick Henry is going this year, not even for any reason of his own, just maybe some structural stuff, it's not very good. Let's go to another run game here for your fifth point. I have some thoughts on this one that I might be hypocritical from what how I sounded about it last week, but we'll get into it here. Hit us with this one.
Right. I want to know, is now the time to invest in the Commanders offense? And that might sound cheap because, Jaden Daniels looks like he's going to come back this week. So it's pretty easy to be like, oh, okay, let's invest in this offense right now. But with him returning, that's like the Lamar situation where he is out there kind of lifting all boats. I think he's going to come back and be fine. I think that's why they kept him out as long as they did. They wanted to make sure that he was going to be back to himself. They weren't going to trot him out there where he didn't necessarily have the same rushing ability. Now it looks like he's healthy. He's practicing in full. He comes back out there, goes right back to being a fantasy starter in your lineup. So no questions there. It is a tough matchup, like going against the Chargers. Like this will be a tough game for him. But I mean, we saw Jackson Dart last week have a pretty decent performance and run the ball against the Chargers defense. So I think it looks okay. We'll have to keep an eye on the receivers. Terry McLaurin probably not going to play this week, I don't think. Deebo Samuel mispracticed on Wednesday with a new heel injury, and it wasn't just a rest day because they listed other guys like Zach Ertz as rest. They didn't list Deebo as rest. They just put him down as heel, but he was back out there at practice today, so seems like he'll be fine to play. I have him as a high-end wide receiver, too. We'll see if he sneaks into the low-end wide receiver 1 ranks this week, just based on the fact that he's kind of the guy in the passing game. Zach Ertz, who seems to find the end zone more often than not and score touchdowns when Jaden Daniels is out there. Now he gets Daniels back, so I think he's back in the conversation as a potential streamer, top 15 fantasy tight end. And then what you were alluding to, this backfield in Washington, right? Is Corey Krosky-Mer, is Bill Krosky-Mer going to have the breakout? Is it coming here? Because right now, we're seeing a backfield like last week. It was divided in thirds and we got all these guys involved. It wasn't just JCM. It was Chris Rodriguez. It was Jeremy McNichols. To me, it still seems like JCM is the best of these backs. And I know there's some people saying that they're giving him more reps in pass pro. They're kind of getting him ready to potentially take over. Dan Graziano of ESPN had a report where he said that the team views him as a guy that could potentially break out in the second half of the season. When is this going to happen? Like we saw it happen with Woody Marks, where all of a sudden he got a ton of work last week. Could this happen at some point soon with JCM? I'm curious to hear your thoughts here, Harmon, on this backfield.
That's just it. That's what you said right there. Is it can just happen out of nowhere, right? And this is, I know last week I kind of poked fun at the Bill Bros, on Twitter. Like he just gets talked about way too much. It's kind of like, I do think the bit jumped the shark at one point where accounts are literally tweeting out how disgusted they are that Austin Eckler, a longtime veteran in the league, is getting how dare he get carries over this 7th round pick that you guys talk too much about in the offseason. So I do think the bit jumped the shark for a little bit there. But now let's come back to earth here for a second. He's a 7th round rookie. These guys this is the first time they played in the NFL. Breaking news. That's what rookie means. They need a little bit of time to ramp up here. I almost feel like now the sentiment is maybe coming a little bit too far. And I might be the one that's guilty of part of that, where the person who has him on the roster is probably getting annoyed with this. Like all these fantasy analysts talking about this guy with the funky 3 name and he's Bill, but his name, I don't even know what this is. Like he's a touchdown or bust guy. I can't trust this player in my lineup. Look at the snap share. It's split 3 ways completely. Here's the thing, though. This running back ecosystem is good. They have the 4th best success rate on their running back runs at 46.5%. So while you can't play any of these 3 guys right now, Boone, if something happens, and guess what? Something always happens. The one rule in the NFL is chaos. That is the God here in the NFL. It is chaos, and everything revolves around chaos. So let's say Chris Rodriguez gets hurt. Let's say the coaching staff just sees a great week of practice from Bill Krosky-Merritt, and they're like, let's throw him out there. Let's get him a little bit more. I don't know if this is the matchup. The Chargers are kind of middle of the road in terms of run defense. They're a great pass defense, kind of middle of the road in the run defense department. But right now, among running backs with 20-plus carries, he has a 62.1% success rate, which is almost 10 percentage points higher than the next place guy, which is Jordan Mason. He has been great on his runs, and I'm telling people, like, what's success rate? NFL coaches are paying attention to success rate because it's how much yardage do you get based on the down and distance. That's how you calculate the metric. So I think they're seeing this too. So to me, he's a guy that you might want to throw in as that little sweetener in a trade. Like, okay, I want to do this guy for this guy, but just throw me Bill Krosky-Merritt. He's not getting you any points anyways. You're frustrated with him. I think, I don't know if it's this week, but I think at some point it's coming for Bill.
I agree. I like him as a buy low right now because of what you said. You can probably get him very, very cheap and maybe even as a throw in and a trade. The name value, it was kind of there a few weeks ago, but it's certainly probably dwindling. So right now, like, I'm ranking him this week in that RB3 range. Don't really want to have to start him, but if there's spots where you do deeper leagues, you can put him out there, hope he hits the big play, or hope this is the week where they start to give him more work. Chris Rodriguez is like kind of that desperation flex. Unless he finds the end zone, you're not really going to be happy with what you get from him, but he is going to get some touches unless a big change happens in this game. And then McNichols is just a stash and not a very good one. Again, I would be looking more towards like younger backs who could potentially vault themselves into more work, kind of upside stashes versus somebody like McNichols.
All right, let's get to your 6th and final.
All right, the last one here is Drake May. Is he ready for a primetime matchup against the Bills? I mean, he's capitalized on like a pretty soft schedule so far here, Harmon, and we knew that going into the season. We knew the Patriots had an easy one. The Raiders, the Dolphins, the Steelers, and the Panthers, and that Steelers defense was even easier than expected, so that made it that much softer. Now he gets the Bills, though, and the Bills haven't necessarily been shutting anybody down with their defense, so I'm not suggesting that the Bills are going to come out and just crush them in that way. The Bills have also been pretty banged up on defense, but Ed Oliver, Matt Milano, they're back at practice in a limited fashion this week. Hopefully they can play. This is also under the primetime lights in Buffalo. It's a place where quarterbacks tend to have a harder time. We also have the real story here, which is the Stephon Diggs return to Buffalo, right? The revenge game. Like at some point we might need to get like a revenge graphic or revenge song. Like we've been bringing revenge games up like every single week here, and we've seen some of them turn into some pretty big performances. Doesn't Diggs seem like the kind of guy that's going to try to do that? Like last week, he's got to be feeling good too. Coming off his best game as a Patriot, over 100 yards in that one, playing time on the rise. He's getting a little further removed from the injury. I could see him coming out and having a massive performance in this one. The Bills will probably want to try to stop that from happening. And yet, after we saw the game that we saw last week from him, I think there's a good chance that Diggs has a good performance in this one. But yeah, like there's not that much in the Patriots attack right now to get that excited about. Hunter Henry is also somebody who I think has really benefited from an early season schedule that was very friendly. I think it's going to turn a little bit on him, especially if we start to see Diggs or anyone else come on. I think Henry kind of has been benefiting from the fact that he had that chemistry. He got to start the season with a soft schedule. Now I think it's going to be a little more difficult moving forward. But yeah, can Drake May kind of keep this going? Because right now he looks like a fantasy quarterback one, but he's going to need some other guys to step up along the way, like Diggs did last week, in order to kind of continue this and in order to kind of get that next level for fantasy and to show, can he potentially be like a mid-range or even high-end QB1, or is he just one of the many quarterbacks who are in that low-end QB1 kind of range?
May looks great so far this year. Like the stats are what they are. He's been good in fantasy, but I just think from like a process standpoint, he still makes 2-ish plays per game where you're just like, brother, what are you doing? And I think he's always going to have that gene in him, and it's just how long can they deal with that versus can we coach it out of him, whatever. But this is his second year starting, first with this coaching staff, and I think you can see how much. Sometimes when you're watching a team, you can feel how much the play caller loves and trusts the quarterback, and I definitely get that vibe watching Josh McDaniels. They put a lot on Drake May's plate from a conceptual standpoint. They ask him to do a lot. He carries the burden of this offense. The stat we're showing on the screen from Dan Orlovsky right now, he is accounted for 77% of his team's yardage, more than any player in football, because their run game stinks. Ramondre Stevenson's been all right this season, but generally they don't have like a very productive run game, and he has been such a productive runner. I think that's going to be a big part of the game plan, and they're just mixing in a ton of interesting quarterback run stuff as well. So I'm really high on Drake May, and for Stephon Diggs, just to be frank, I think the film was brutal in the first few weeks, but we know he's coming off of a serious injury. He's way ahead of his timeline to even be on the football field right now. That's not uncommon for some of these injured players to come back, and they just don't look that great in week 1 of the return. Here in week 4, I think he looked much better. I think him and Drake May are getting some timing down together. They're getting more live reps. I'm really excited about their potential connection. I think if Diggs can emerge as that guy, the 12 personnel that they use, they move Diggs around a little bit. I think that's a good building block for what can be a sustainable offense in New England.
Yeah, I have him ranked as a top 30 receiver this week, in part because of the revenge thing, in part because of the production that we saw last week from him. And I think you kind of have to have him there moving forward, and we'll see if he can follow that up and continue to take on more snaps. Another thing I will say coming out of this game, and maybe before it happens here, Dalton Kincaid, I think it's somebody that people should look to move. Like, he's not getting more playing time. That was the concern, right? And I say this as a Bills fan. Obviously, I always got to put that on the table. But he's not getting the increase in snaps, and yet he's kind of still gotten by. He's a top 5 fantasy tight end in fantasy points per game, and he's done it on touchdowns, basically, right? So in that small sample size, you can get it done. Over the long haul, if he's not getting that increase in playing time, it's going to be very difficult to keep up those kind of numbers. So if you can sell him for top 5, even top 7 or 8 value at tight end, I would do it. And there's a lot of tight ends coming on right now. I mean, we talked about Darren Waller, Mason Taylor on the Jets is somebody who's really starting to come into his own. There's other guys that you could look to. And if you can get something for Kincaid, you package him with another starter on your team, upgrade somewhere else, and then you go back to the waiver wire and grab one of those guys that I'm mentioning and just start them. I think you could do it. You could also try to make a trade for like a George Kittle or somebody that you could potentially buy low on. There's a lot of ways you could go about it, but I think the key here is that Kincaid is probably somebody you want to move before it's too late.
I think that's a good call, and I love your point, and we'll transition on this. I love your point about how there's so many random tight ends kind of coming on right now, and not to keep talking about my own fantasy teams, but if we can throw that graphic back up on the screen here, I have one dynasty team where I drafted Kyle Pitts in the rookie draft one year, I think at like 7th overall, and he's just hung around on my roster because obviously nobody has wanted to trade for. Nobody's come banging on my door for offers for Kyle Pitts, by the way. He's been hanging around on my roster this whole time, but like we're showing on the screen, he's tight end 8. The other tight ends on that team is Juwan Johnson, Hunter Henry, and Mason Taylor. I'm like, I have with a straight face had to start Taysom Hill when he's been active at times on this team because I'm hoping to scam into points because that's how gross this tight end room has been. Now I'm looking at this roster thinking, what do I do with these 4 guys? Like they're all kind of making it happen right now. So that's just how weird tight end is in the NFL, where these guys they can be doing nothing and then they can pop up for random spurts, and that just is the nature of the position.
In a lot of dynasty leagues where it's not dynasty, or not tight end premium, I think that's one way that you can just keep finding value. You keep going to the waiver wire, you keep going to the late round rookie picks, you grab some of these tight ends, they hit, you get a room like you have, and then you start to sell them off for picks or for other players, package them in deals. I've done that in so many dynasty leagues. Tight end premium is different, a lot more tight ends rostered. People understand the value of them in those, but just in regular dynasty leagues that aren't tight end premium, you can just keep churning that tight end room and selling it. And I've done that for many, many years. So highly recommend people try that strategy.
Yeah, until you get 4 of them and you're like, what is this? what is this weird megazord of a tight end room? But all right, on that note, we are going to take another quick break. When we come back, we have literally no one's games of the week with 3 total doozies here. We will get into them right after this break. All right, we are back. Let's get into my literally no one's games of the week. The yawning, the sleepy time music could not be any more perfect for our first game here in literally no one's games of the week. Because guess what? The first one is an island game, and it's the London game. Vikings at Browns, Justin Boone. I mean, international relations are frayed enough. We're sending Carson Wentz and Dylan Gabriel overseas to the folks in Europe. I don't know about this. But nevertheless, while this is truly literally no one's games of the week, this is a fascinating contest. I always try to stick up for these beautiful little bad games here. I mean, on the Browns side of things, Boone, obviously it is interesting that we're getting a new quarterback in here. And I will run by my theory that I had with Ray Garvin earlier in the week with you, that the real winner here of this Browns change from Joe Flacco to Dylan Gabriel is not Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, Harold Fannin, any of those guys. Isaiah Bond, people are interested in what Isaiah Bond's going to be. We'll see. But the real winner is Quinshon Judkins, Boone, who has a lot going against him. They've been very pass heavy. The offensive line has kind of fallen apart. But the third thing is that Joe Flacco is a pocket sloth, total immovable object back there. Can't move at all. It just completely limits your run game. Gabriel is not some kind of, Lamar Jackson or anything, but he can move around a little bit. So, and the Vikings run defense has been gettable. So I actually kind of think this is a sneaky, interesting spot for rookie running back Quinshon Judkins, simply because not Joe Flacco is going to be under center.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. I mean, he's been good no matter what the matchup's been. He's been good with Joe Flacco under there. Like, he's been performing. So hats off to him for that. Overall, though, other than him, like, this is going to be such an ugly game. And 35.5 is the projected point total on this one. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised, and yet somehow I'm surprised. But, like, we're talking about teams that are both top 7 for fewest fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. The Browns are the 3rd toughest against running backs. The Vikings are the toughest against wide receivers for fantasy. Like, it is going to be a struggle for guys to put up fantasy points in this game. So yeah, you hit on the right one there. Judkins is the guy that might have a matchup that he can take advantage of, and they might, throw something a little different by putting the rookie out there at quarterback this week. So I think that's a great call. I don't know though. I really like the Vikings most weeks. The Browns, I try to avoid those games as much as I can or watch them very, very quickly. I wish I could sleep in for this one, and yet I will not be able to. I will be up doing my rankings with that game on, and we will be live on Sunday morning at 11:30 Fantasy Football Live. So people should come check out that, even though there'll be a game going on at that point.
Yeah, if you want to see Fitz have some disgusting overreaction to something that happens in this game, you should definitely check out Fantasy Football Live on Sunday morning, 11:30 a.m. Eastern. You can do that right here on this YouTube channel, the Yahoo Fantasy Football YouTube channel. The other question I wanted to ask you, though, was about the Minnesota Vikings, and because both of us were big Jordan Mason honks in the offseason, right? The Vikings run game has been good this season, 47.6% success rate. That's the 3rd best on running back runs this year. But we've got significant offensive line injuries now. Ryan Kelly's dealing with a concussion. Brian O'Neill, right tackle's banged up. Donovan Jackson, he just had a friggin' surgery. And now we've got this brutal run matchup here against the Browns that allow 2.6 yards per carry. How nervous are you about Jordan Mason? He's not going to get game scripted out, you would think, like he did last week. But is he a guy that you can confidently start in this matchup this week?
Not confidently. No, it pushes him down into like the low end RB2, kind of high end RB3 range. And yeah, you don't feel great about it. On top of the fact that if they fall down in a game, and again, yeah, will the Browns be the team to actually put them down a touchdown or two? Probably not. But if that happens, we've seen Xavier Scott is the one that's going to get out there in passing down situations, not Mason. So that kind of changes how we're looking at him. And we knew when Aaron Jones came back, that would be the case. But I think we hoped that there was a chance that while Jones was out, we'd see Mason take on more of the passing work, and he just simply hasn't. So that kind of puts him down into that range of like early down grinder types in an offense that eventually is going to come around. And I think he's going to be good for fantasy over the long haul. And yet this is not a matchup where you're going to want to play him. So if you have other options in that range, I'd be looking to them, even considering some of those guys, some of those backups that we talked about earlier that could step into starting roles like Rico Dowdle and Rashad White. I would consider those guys over Mason potentially this week.
Next game to talk through here, and I feel like this team is just going to be a staple here. Tennessee Titans at Arizona Cardinals. I'll just say quickly, I got almost nothing to say about the Titans. I don't think anything good is happening on the Titans offense.
Hey, Tajay
right
Spears
now.
might be back. I mean, he's still got a ton of tape on his ankle, but like Tajay Spears coming back either this week or some point soon is nice. I mean, based on all the tape on the ankle, I don't know how much he's going to factor into that backfield, but we'll see. Regardless, him getting healthy, that's a positive.
Oh, yeah, sick. I really wanted a split backfield on the worst offense in football. Hell yeah.
Oh,
I mean, Tony Pollard's not even a running back 2 in fantasy, and I believe he leads the NFL in percentage of team running back touches right now. So now we're shaving off some of his workload.
That was one of the rare instances where I was coming at it from like a human standpoint and not necessarily a fantasy standpoint on that one. I was like, hey, it's great that he's healthy. And you're like, it's not going to help our fantasy teams, Boone. Like, yeah.
Terrific, Boone. The one time you want to go human interest story on me, and it's about the damn Titans backfield. Excellent.
What else is there to do when it comes to the Titans? You better find a human interest story because you're not finding anything positive for fantasy.
Cam Ward, he's the first overall pick. I don't know if you guys remember that, but okay. So put that to the side for a second. Yeah, Tony Pollard, Ian Harted's stat here. Tony Pollard has the 13th most touches in the NFL, and he's the PPR running back 29. He's not even scamming PPR points. All right, so put the Titans aside here for a second. I want to talk about the Cardinals here. We talked about the backfield earlier. I just want to know, like, what are we going to get out of Marvin Harrison Jr. in this matchup? This is a good matchup. Like, the Titans have been gettable in the secondary. L'Jarius Sneed pretended he didn't know who Nico Collins was last week and then was toasted by Nico Collins in that game. So that's how things have been going for L'Jarius Sneed. They've had issues all throughout the secondary for multiple years now. No surprises there. Harrison had what I would call almost like a cartoonish game last week, where if you're a big-time Marvin Harrison hater, you had a great first half where he is making truly cartoonish mistakes at the catch point, and it just looks like him and Kyler Murray are reading off 2 different sheets of music. If you're somebody like me who's a little bit more sympathetic to Marvin Harrison Jr. as a talent, you're pointing to that end of third quarter, fourth quarter, be like, see, like there's still something there. So Boone, like, what do we get out of Marvin Harrison in this matchup where I have seen people start to get excited about this potential duel here with L'Jarius Sneed?
I have him around wide receiver 25. I don't know how you could push him much higher than that based on what we've seen so far. He's just one of those guys. He's not a guy that's going to win you weeks. He's a guy that at this point you're just hoping comes through with, 60 yards and a touchdown. Would be great if he can do that like he did last week. So it's such a weird situation where we thought this year he was going to come in and maybe take his game to another level. And yet I don't know that I've seen anything that makes me feel that confident. It's going to be this up and down kind of performance from him. And it makes him somebody that you're just putting in your lineup because you're hoping that he puts it all together at some point. Not because you feel particularly, not because you feel particularly confident that he's going to give you great production. I think for this offense, one area where I've been telling everybody this week, and he might come out and have a good game, Kyler Murray somehow rostered 92% of Yahoo leagues right now. Like, what am I missing, Harmon? Like, the guy has not put up good fantasy points. Is this just like purely name value? Because if it is, go trade Kyler Murray immediately. And if he has a good game here, make sure you trade him next week. I would not want to be holding on to Kyler Murray, not a difference maker. Don't really see why people have him on their teams in 92% of leagues. What are we doing?
Yeah, I don't know. And the run game has been terrible. That's the big problem with this. Michael Carter, Amari DiMercato, there's some Bam Knight people out there. Remember Zonovan Knight? I mean, that was a name that was like hadn't heard that name in a minute. This run game has not been good even when James Conner was in there. So that's a problem. I will say about Marvin Harrison, I do every time I open up the rankings every week to do rankings, I drop him down, all right, get him below wide receiver 20. Because I don't think he's a top 20 receiver. But this week, though, it's like, do you feel better about Marvin Harrison or do you feel better about Brian Thomas? You feel better about A.J. Brown? I mean, it gets pretty bleak at wide receiver with Drake London, Roma Dunze, and some of those guys not here this week. I mean, shoot. So if this was any normal team, I'd be convinced they'd come out and, all right, Marv, let's build on that confidence from last week. But the Cardinals have just never approached Marvin Harrison, or Kyler's never approached Marvin Harrison that way. So I don't know. That's almost more of a human interest story than a fantasy football story. So let's move away from this game and let's finish with the final one here, which this is purely a fantasy question. Lions at Bengals. I mean, the Bengals have made themselves into no one's game of the week territory because let's be clear, the Lions they're not involved here. Here's your analysis on the Lions. Start them. Boom. Okay, we're done there. Bengals, though, Boone, this is probably the softest spot for this Bengals passing game since Jake Browning has taken over as the starter. I mean, the Lions still have a good defense, but do you think we're going to see anything different out of Browning and some of these Bengals pass catchers? I think Chase Brown, it's cooked, it's over. But with the pass catchers, any hope in this game? Because Detroit is dealing with injuries in the secondary.
I feel like this is one that might look very foolish in a couple weeks based on the fact that like the Lions game is a bit of a softer matchup, and then they play the Packers the week after. But I am going to say, I think this is a spot where you might want to go and buy Jamar Chase. And it's because of those two matchups that they had. I know it looks bad right now. He looks like a low-end wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 potentially for fantasy based on how he's performed since Burrow went out. But man, like those matchups were so difficult against the Vikings, against the Broncos and Pat Surtain. What if he comes out and starts to get that volume at some point? It's a lot of like hope, and hope is not a strategy, I know, but man, like I think he could potentially turn it around here. He's just so talented. I can't imagine a scenario where he goes the rest of the season and, he's not topping 50 yards in games, which is what he hasn't been able to do the last 2 games with Browning out there. So I do think the matchups are going to help. After the Packers game, it does get even easier from then on. So he'll get some friendlier opponents. There will be some better games. I think you're getting a player of Chase's value. I think there will be high points. And I think this might be the spot to try to go get him based on how bad it's been the last 2 weeks, but you don't feel particularly great. It's just trying to pluck a little bit of value from that offense. He's the only one.
Yeah, he's the only one. T. Higgins is just never going to survive in his particular role with a quarterback like Browning, but I know it's been so bad the last 2 weeks, but just remember how they did scam him some production in Browning's first little action, not a start, but action this year in the Jaguars game. The Jaguars defense has been good. So I just think it has been 2 brutal spots for the Bengals offense, and it couldn't have gone worse. That was literally the worst offensive performance we've seen this year from a gaining first down standpoint in Denver last week. This is a little bit of an easier spot here at home against a secondary that's dealing with injury. So I agree. If you're going to buy Jamar Chase, I think now is the time to do it.
Yeah, and to be clear, too, I'm not suggesting you go out and pay top 12 receiver value for him. This is if you can buy low, you can get him for wide receiver 2 kind of value, and you get down into like that range you were talking about, the A.J. Browns, Jacoby Myers, the guys who are kind of like the teens into the low 20s, some of the guys in that range. If you can get Chase for them or a little package that involves them, I'd be trying to do it right now.
All right, we're back. It is time for the Hurry Up Offense. This is where Boone and I go rapid fire through the rest of the show, forcing the other person to answer a question, respond to a bold prediction for week 5 in 40 seconds or less. If you're new here, remember there is one twist. One of us per show can choose to throw the challenge flag on the other and force them to expand on their answer/reaction if it is warranted. Once the flag is thrown, that's it. Just once per week. So, welcome to the Hurry Up Offense. All right, Boone, as the elder statesman here, you can go first.
I'll take it. If you could wave a magic wand and you could just undo any injury that has occurred in the NFL this year, which player would you bring back?
Lamar Jackson, definitely. I have a super flex team with a bunch of people from the industry. It's because we do head-to-head and total points. The team is 8-0, and we just lost Lamar Jackson. So, we've got some breathing room, but I don't want breathing room. I want to keep smashing.
I love all the guys that are, out for the season are just Harmon, are you serious? You're bringing back the guy who's, out for, a game or 2, potentially, instead of guys who are out for the whole year?
Whatever.
Malik Nabers? Come on, man. Bring back one of these star receivers. Oh.
He'll be back. He'll be back next year. It's fine. All right, I'll go with one of mine here. Is Jets versus Cowboys the best fantasy game that no one is talking about?
Yeah, it's going to be a great fantasy game. I mean, how many times have I talked about the Jets, that trio, as like guys that you should be buying low on? I did it before last week's games. I think the schedule is going to get so easy. It's going to start with this Cowboys game. It gets very easy over the next month or so. And then late in the season, like fantasy playoffs, you're going to want to have these Jets guys on your roster. That's a great one. And man, George Pickens, like just absolutely stepping up last week. It's going to be some big time fireworks in that game. And Jaden Blue might actually get out on the field.
Who?
Shout out producer Colin. Jaden Blue, who we thought totally fell out of the league before the season, who got hurt. He's been on the bench the whole time. Miles Sanders is injured. Jaden Blue is going to get his opportunity, though it's not nearly as exciting because Javonte Williams has a pretty good stranglehold on that backfield now.
There's so many people that have just no idea what this Jaden Blue inside joke. They're like, falling out of the league? What are we talking about? All right, give us your next one here.
Rank the Buccaneers wide receivers in order of who you would want on your fantasy team for the rest of the season. You don't have to go too deep here. Just the top three guys. Who would you want on your
Sterling Shepard, number one, obviously. No, I think it's actually pretty easily Emeka Egbuka, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. I feel actually pretty content about that.
You weren't impressed by like Godwin's game last week? Like the fact that he came back, got that many targets. You don't think that that's going to potentially change anything? No,
actually, I'm a little more. I'm not concerned. I mean, again, he didn't look good in the game to me. I don't think he looked like himself. That's understandable, but the role was weird, right? 14 air yards per target, not a lot of slot work. I think that changes when Evans gets back, but I just think Egbuka is on that like upward trajectory, so I'll ride that rest of the season.
I agree. All right, you're up.
All right, do you have any strong feelings on the Seahawks backfield right now?
Strong feelings that I'm kind of unhappy with the way it's worked out fantasy, because this is almost like worst case scenario that both guys are remaining very involved. And you brought that up as a possibility before the season, and I kind of dismissed it. I still think we're seeing that Kenneth Walker is by far the most effective back. And I would love to see him just like run away with that job and get the goal line opportunities and not see them bring Zach Charbonnet in to score a touchdown, almost 2 touchdowns last week. But yeah, Kenneth Walker is still somebody that you're going to start in fantasy. Charbonnet is just that touchdown or bust RB3. But no, I don't have any strong feelings like I did before the season. I wish that Walker was running away with the job, and he's not.
Fair enough. I think that's a good, reasonable take.
All right. Which rookie wide receiver who hasn't had a big game yet is going to break out by the end of the season? We talked about the running back that could in Bill Krosky-Merritt. Who's the receiver that we haven't seen break out or have a big game yet who could do it before the end of the year?
Oh man, the rookie that could do it by the end of the season.
I mean, is it Jaden Higgins? Is it there's Deontay Thornton?
Is it stupid?
There's a lot of guys that are getting opportunity.
It's not going to be Thornton. Is it stupid of me to say that the answer I think is Travis Hunter? I know. I knew you
were going to say that. I almost wrote the question in a way saying that, like,
yes,
except for Travis Hunter,
okay,
who's it going to be? Because I
knew
you were
put him aside. Put him aside.
Throw the flag. Throw the flag. Throw the flag and make him
take
somebody other than Travis Hunter.
Fair enough. Yeah. Okay. So I think that's fine. Yeah. Good flag throw. I do. I'm really interested to see what Matthew Golden's usage looks like coming out of the bye week. Post bye rookie bump, or is he more of like a second half of the year guy? He, to me, probably is the favorite candidate outside of Travis Hunter to be the next guy that rises here. But he's just getting like Jaden Reed's usage, which Jaden Reed's usage was super annoying and frustrating from a fantasy standpoint. Good player, but annoying in fantasy. So I think that gives me pause, but he would probably be the next logical answer because I think he's looked pretty good. All right, I will go with one more here, I think. Kendre Miller is a top 5 stash in fantasy football right now. That is a prediction for me.
I think that's a great call. And we've talked about it on the show a bunch of times, right? That Kamara could get traded. He's also an older back. Like, we're not talking about the fact that Alvin Kamara could slow down or get hurt. Like, all of these things are possible when you're on the wrong side of 30. And if you watch it, like, I kind of could make an argument that Kendre Miller right now looks like the better back between the two, right? Like, so it makes sense to give him more opportunities. I think that's a great call, and I've tried to pick him up as many places as I can. I've mentioned him in the deep stash column as well. So yeah, go out there and pick up Kendre Miller. I think that's a really, really good call.
All right, give me one more here.
All right.
Boone.
Oh man. All right. With the Ravens at 1-3, and with Lamar Jackson banged up, and with the defense looking like it is, and the injuries, I want you to give me a panic meter level for their chances of making the playoffs. How concerned are you about the Ravens' chances of making the playoffs with Lamar Jackson out a week, 2 weeks, maybe not back till after their bye? With all these defensive injuries, are they still going to be there?
I will say it's like 6.5 out of 10 would be the panic meter. If it's our panic meter, not coping corner, okay. I forgot we have a panic meter, right? Definitely not coping corner yet. I think I'm going to go with some panic, only because I think the division is still gettable. Like the Steelers are the Steelers, I get it, but if Lamar can come back, I think the division is still gettable. The Bengals aren't going to do it. The Browns are competitive, and there's some spots in the AFC wildcard that I think they could grab too. So I'll still stick with some panic, but I think the dreams of them being a Super Bowl team that's probably over.
Okay.
All right, we got to finish on an even number here. You only get one word on this. You only get to reply with the one name, so no time. But we got to finish even here. Be selfish. Who is one player that's not getting much opportunity to prove what he is in fantasy right now? If you had the power to make his team, give him that opportunity, who is it? Again, you can only say the name. You can't justify it.
Bill.
All right, that's good. Well, we already gave plenty of reasons earlier, so we don't even need any time there. Perfect. Look at that. All right, that's the hurry up offense. While fantasy football season is in full swing, and you guys are loving it out there, fantasy basketball season is about to tip off. Yahoo Fantasy has a brand new format for you this season. Welcome to High Score, where the only thing that matters is the best performance from your starters once a week. High Score tips off October 21st. Get in on the action and draft your squad right now on the Yahoo Fantasy app, or head to yahoofantasy.com/basketball. Boone, that is going to do it for us today. Important to note, though, for the people in the chat, if you're busy, chop it up in there. We have just the show for you with those specific questions. Every Friday, John Daigle goes live right here on the Yahoo Fantasy Football YouTube channel for a live Q&A, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. He's here for you, so make sure you tune into that. Boone, shout out to you. Hell of a show. I will see you on Sunday morning, 11:30 a.m. Eastern, again, right here on the YouTube channel, live for Fantasy Football Live. So I look forward to seeing you there. We'll be checking in on Dylan Gabriel live, buddy. What a time to be alive.
Can't wait.
Yes, I mean, people absolutely cannot wait. As for us, this show will be back with the debut of Joel Smith on the podcast. He is going to be going live with me. Chris Allen is stepping away for 1 week, so we're happy to have Joel on the show. He's going to be here live with me right as the late game windows end. So when Commanders Chargers hits 000, join us right here on YouTube as we recap that. Until then, we are out.